السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله أشهد أن محمد رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونؤمن به ونتوكل عليه ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهد الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وسلم. أما بعد فقد قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتابه المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. Inshallah, my dear respected brothers, now being in the second half of the month of Sha'ban, the month of Ramadan is right around the corner. And as we discussed a few weeks ago, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, with his Sahaba radiallahu anhum ajma'een, he would, before the month of Ramadan, tell them about the month of Ramadan and teach them about the month of Ramadan. He would tell them to make dua and bring their attention toward the month of Ramadan from months in advance. That way, as soon as the month of Ramadan came, not a single moment of it would go to waste. And as we've discussed in the last few weeks, some of the khatiras in the masjid a couple of weeks ago in the khutba as well, some of those things which are connected with the month of Ramadan, we've spoken about the Quran, we've spoken about taqwa, which is obviously connected with fasting in the Quran, different topics that we have talked about. But inshallah today we will focus a little bit more on the month of Ramadan itself. And one of the famous ahadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, narrated to us by Hadrat Salman al-Farisi radiyallahu an, where he mentions that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he called the Sahaba in the last days of Sha'ban to get them ready for the month of Ramadan. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he gathered them and then he spoke to them. It is a brief hadith, and if you pick up a book and try to read it, it's maybe about one page. But subhanallah, how many points Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentioned in there that are very, profound things that inshallah we will be expanding on and trying to look into the deeper meaning of the month of Ramadan and how we can take benefit from the month of Ramadan that is coming. So Salman radiallahu an, as I mentioned, he reports that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam gathered the Sahaba toward the end of Sha'ban and he spoke to them. And he started by saying that on the last day, at the end of Sha'ban, he gathered them, he said to them that a most blessed month in which lies a night more greater in virtue than 1,000 months is coming. Right? A month in which a night that is better than 1,000 months is coming. The night of Laylatul Qadr, as we all know. This night of Laylatul Qadr, my dear respected brothers, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions it in the Quran as the night where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sent down the Quran as one Quran. The entire Quran was sent down from the heavens to the first sky in one night, this night of Laylatul Qadr. Inna anzalnahu fi laylatin mubarakah. Inna anzalnahu fi laylatil qadr. That when the Quran was first sent down to the dunya in one night, And then from there, as we know, over 23 years sent down piece by piece to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. As Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentioned in the hadith, the same meaning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives in the Quran, Laylatul Qadri khayrun min alfi shahr, that this night of power that is coming, it is greater than 1,000 months, not equal to, but greater than 1,000 months. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam has told us that this night of Laylatul Qadr, seek it amongst the odd nights of the last 10 nights of Ramadan. So we still have a bit of time before the night of Laylatul Qadr gets here. It is toward the end of the month of Ramadan. And because of that, I wanted to mention it quickly, but I wanted to move on to some of the more, pertinent points that will become relevant for us very soon. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam continues that it is a month in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has made fasting fard by day and tarawih sunnah by night. Now these points, my dear respected brothers. Fasting, my dear respected brothers, unfortunately for us, it has become something where we just stay hungry the whole day for the sake of staying hungry. And in our deen, my dear respected brothers, subhanallah, this is one of the biggest calamities amongst the Muslims today, is that we get in this habit of just doing things for the sake of doing it, not realizing the maqsad behind it, not realizing how it's supposed to be done, but just for the sake of doing it, I have to get up and pray. So without thinking, subhanallah, it happens sometimes where a person's entire salah will go by, even though he prayed his salah, not once he thought about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have taken it just to be a set of motions. Even one of my teachers, he was telling me, the masjid where he leads salah, he had one youth come to him a few days ago and say that I've been praying my entire life, but I never felt anything in my salah. I never gained anything in my salah. I just feel like I'm going through the motions. Unfortunately, my dear respected brothers, we do this in all of our a'mal. Even a few weeks ago, when speaking about the Quran, this is why this point was emphasized, about not just reading through the Quran, not just moving our tongues as fast as we can, but taking the time to ponder on the ayat, taking the time to benefit from the ayat, taking the time to see what my Rabb Azza wa Jalla is telling me. Every part of deen, my dear respected brothers, there is something deeper behind it. It isn't just there for the sake of going through the motions, and it is the same thing with fasting. Fasting was never meant just to stay hungry for the sake of staying hungry. Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam mentions this, that rubba min sa'imin laysa lahu min siyamihi illa al-ju', that how many are there from the people who fast that they are getting nothing from their fasting except hunger. Because they started fasting, they stopped eating before the time of Fajr, but everything else in their life is the same. They just took it that all it is, I just have to stop eating for a few hours, I just have to shift my schedule, that is it. The way they talk is still the same. The way they act is still the same. They didn't realize that one of the purposes of fasting is for one to spiritually cleanse himself from the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. My dear respected brothers, wallahi, if we go through the days of Ramadan and we are fasting just for the sake of staying hungry, we are just staying thirsty for the sake of staying thirsty, then we will miss out on what the month of Ramadan has to offer. And this is what Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling us. There's one incident that happened from a few of the sahabiyya of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. One of the companions of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam came to him and he said that, Ya Rasulullah, there is 2 women in such and such home and the husband is out. So who is going to look after the iftar of these 2 women? Because they are fasting and it is the month of Ramadan. Who is going to look after their iftar? The husband is out. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, go to them and ask them to try and throw up. To try and throw up. So this person was confused that they haven't ate anything, but Khair, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is telling me, no problem, I will go. So he went and he told them that Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam is saying for you to try and throw up. So they were also confused, but again, the words of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, so they tried. And subhanallah, even though they were fasting, when they threw up, there was chunks of meat that came, raw chunks of meat. And they were all astonished by this, and the Sahabi went back to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And he said that even though physically they didn't eat anything, they were fasting. But while fasting, they were busy in ghiba the whole time. They were busy in backbiting. These people aren't gaining anything from their fasting. This, my dear respected brothers, the point of staying hungry in the month of Ramadan isn't just to stay hungry, but the point is to benefit from this fasting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, كُتِبَ عَلَيْكُمُ الصِّيَامِ كَمَا كُتِبَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ مِن قَبْلِكُمْ لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. That fasting has been made fard on you like those before you, so that you get taqwa from this fasting. That is what you are looking for from this fasting. It isn't about the hunger, but it is about attaining that taqwa. Because when a person, he fasts for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's doing two things to his nafs. Right? As we know already from the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that in the month of Ramadan, one of our two main enemies is locked up, shaitan is locked up. From the hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, we know. We are left with one enemy, which is our nafs, our desires. And the month of Ramadan came, fasting came to, number one, weaken this nafs, and number two, show us how to fight back against our nafs and against our desires, to give us this taqwa. When it comes to weakening one's nafs, the ulama explain that as a person eats, this is the number one fuel for his nafs, for his desires. That a person's soul in his body is located next to his stomach. And as he eats, as his stomach is getting nourished, as his body is getting nourished, his soul is also getting energy from this as well. And this is why Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he used to tell the youth, the ulama, they take this principle from a few ahadith. One of the famous ones, this incident where he is with some of the youth sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he says that, Ya ma'ashar al-shabab, O gathering of youth, Man istata'a minkum al-ba'ata falyatazawwaj, that whoever from you is capable, he should get married. Because it will help him protect his gaze, it will help him protect himself from zina, all of these things. But whoever can't, he is incapable, whatever it may be, for any reason he can't get married, فَعَلَيْهِ بِالصَّوْمِ, then he should fast. Because when a person fasts, it weakens his nafs and it weakens those shahawat, it weakens a person's desires, and it makes it easier for a person to go against his desires. And then not only will it be easier for a person to go against his desires, but practically in the month of Ramadan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us how to directly go against one's nafs, and how to go against one's desires, and how to bring the taqwa of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first. In the month of Ramadan, when something halal is there will be halal food and water there, but the person is fasting. Halal food, halal water, things that aren't even desires, things that are necessary, a person's needs, essential for his survival. But you will see in the month of Ramadan, no matter how hungry the person is, no matter how thirsty the person is, no matter how bad he wants that thing which is halal and that thing that he needs, he will never eat that food while he is fasting. He will do imsak and he will hold back. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying that if in the month of Ramadan you can stay away from that thing that is halal, from that thing that is pure, from that thing that you need solely to please me, then why outside of the month of Ramadan can't you stay away from that thing that is haram to please me as well? This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is showing us. لَعَلَّكُمْ تَتَّقُونَ. But today, the mentality that we have, that it is me, it is my choice, I can do what I like. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala talks about this in the Quran, that this mentality, it comes from arrogance, and arrogance and taqwa are opposites. That when a person has taqwa, he will humble himself before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He will fear disobeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He will humble himself, he will please Allah. Whereas when a person has arrogance, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, أَفَرَأَيْتَ مِنِ اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ وَأَضَلَّهُ اللَّهُ عَلَى عِلْمٍ وَخَتَمَ عَلَى سَمْعِهِ وَقَلْبِهِ وَجَعَلَ عَلَى بَصَرِهِ غِشَاوَةً. That there will be some people that because of their arrogance, ala ilm, despite the fact that they have knowledge, they will disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knowingly. Because in that moment, اتَّخَذَ إِلَهَهُ هَوَاهُ, in that moment, they will make their desires above Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala temporarily. And they will say that even though I know this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from me, He wants me to avoid, whatever the thing is. But in this moment, he will feel, no, what I want is more important, and he will commit the sin. This is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, that through fasting, that should be changed. A person should gain humility and gain taqwa as opposed to continuing on with the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If the month of Ramadan goes by and we have no more taqwa in our lives, then what did we do in the month of Ramadan, my dear respected brothers? This is the purpose behind fasting. And then the point Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam mentions about Taraweeh, that Taraweeh has been made sunnah by night. And mashallah, usually we see many of the brothers here for Taraweeh in the masjid. We see brothers here, the masjid is packed. But there are still so many brothers who are not here. Unfortunately, it is the reality. And it is the sunnah, not only a sunnah, but from the emphasized sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And that Taraweeh should be prayed in the masjid as well is established from the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has told us that whoever stands up in salah in the nights in the month of Ramadan, hoping reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then definitely that salah will be a means of his forgiveness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This Taraweeh, my dear respected brothers, Taraweeh itself in Arabic, it comes from the word raha, which means to rest. The whole point of Taraweeh isn't that how we can get the rak'ah done as quickly as possible and make it back home. The purpose of Taraweeh, it comes from the word raha, because it's supposed to be something that's done nice and slowly. It's a chance, my dear respected brothers, to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When a person is standing in the night, إِنَّ نَاشِئَةَ اللَّيْلِ هِيَ أَشَدُّ وَطْأً وَأَقْوَ مُقِيلًا, that when a person is standing in the night in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is one of the most difficult things to do. It is one of the hardest ways, again, to go against one's nafs. When a person is standing in the night in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he is connecting directly with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is why majority of the ulama mention as well that after Iqra, after the first wahi that came to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, the second thing that came was Ya ayyuhal muzammil قم الليل إلا قليلا نصفه أو انقص منه قليلا أو زد عليه ورتل القرآن ترتيلا. This is what we should be thinking in our Taraweeh. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam that stand half the night or a little more or a little less and recite the Quran nice and slowly with tartil, with all the tajweed and the ma'rifatul wuquf and all of these different rules that come. This is the point behind Taraweeh, connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues after this a few ayat later, وَاذْكُرِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ وَتَبَتَّلْ إِلَيْهِ تَبْتِيلًا, that the point is that you have some time where you are devoted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and just working on building that ta'alluq with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is what the Qiyamul Layl is for. This is what Salatul Taraweeh is for. It is not just to go up and down, my dear respected brothers. And wallahi, sometimes we think, you see sometimes in the masjid, you see different people doing different things. Sometimes there are brothers, they're sitting against the wall when the imam comes to ruku, then they're running. My dear respected brothers, if we're doing that, what do we think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give us from that salah? Do we think that we are playing with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? We are making a joke with the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and then we think Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to reward us and elevate us. Wallahi, my dear respected brothers, we have turned it into a joke. This month of Ramadan that is coming is an opportunity for us, my dear respected brothers. Then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, again he continues and he says that whoever wants to draw near to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whoever wants to gain closeness with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he should exert himself in the month of Ramadan and try. Because every reward that a person does in the month of Ramadan is multiplied many folds. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam says that the normal reward for something nafl, like whenever you do something nafl outside the month of Ramadan, you pray 2 rak'ah nafl salah. If you pray that same nafl salah in the month of Ramadan, you will get the reward of praying fard salah. Subhanallah. The ulama explain from one hadith of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, where he says sallallahu alayhi wasallam that if a person skips his fard fasting for a day in the month of Ramadan, if he fasts the rest of his life, he can't make up for that day that he missed in terms of reward. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is saying here that the nafil you do outside of the month of Ramadan will equal to praying, that the nafil that you do outside the month of Ramadan, when you do it inside the month of Ramadan, it will equal a fard outside of the month of Ramadan, subhanAllah. And when you pray fard salah in the month of Ramadan, or you do any of your fara'id, it is as if you did 70 fara'id outside of the month of Ramadan. This is why, my dear respected brothers, so many rewards are there from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Everything is multiplied so exponentially. It is imperative that we don't waste our time when the month comes. All of these talks before the month of Ramadan comes is so when the month of Ramadan comes, the time doesn't get wasted. The ulama give an example that in the month of Ramadan, when the moon is sighted for the start of the month of Ramadan, it should be like a person is starting his salah. And he is continuing that salah until the moon for Eid is seen. Until the moon for the end of Ramadan, for the day of Eid is seen. And the ulama explained by this that what is meant is the same way that when a person is in his salah, if anything comes to his mind, he tries to block it out. He tries to focus on Allah. He is only looking where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. He is only moving how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. His tongue is busy in the dhikr of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like that, a person's entire Ramadan should go by. Our time in general, my dear respected brothers, is one of the most valuable commodities that we have. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has told us about this again and again. Take advantage of 5 things before 5 other things come. Take advantage of your youth before old age. One of these points, take advantage of your free time before you become busy. In another hadith narrated by Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam says that there are 2 blessings which many of the people are heedless for. They take them for granted, they waste them, and they don't realize until after. As-sihhatu wal-faragh, good health and having free time. The month of Ramadan, my dear respected brothers, each and every single moment, the rewards are multiplied. We should try to make it valuable. Imam Ghazali rahimahullah, he writes that the most unfortunate person on the entire earth, the most unfortunate person in the dunya, is the person who an hour of his life goes by without him doing some kind of ibadah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. An hour of his life goes by without him doing something that he was created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to do. My dear respected brothers, this isn't only for the month of Ramadan, this is for our general life. Then we can imagine in the month of Ramadan how much more particular we should be about the time that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us. There's many more points left in this hadith, but we are running out of time. So I will mention one last point inshaAllah, and maybe we will finish at a later date. But the last point I will mention, then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he continues, and he talks about generosity. And he says that it is the month of sympathizing with your brothers, and the month that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increases sustenance. And what is meant by this, by sympathizing with your brothers, it is meant that have pity on those that maybe you have iftar, but have pity on those who don't have anything to break their fast. There are people there, my dear respected brothers, we know how our brothers and sisters overseas are living. We know even in our own community, subhanAllah, how some brothers are living. They are fasting days at a time, not by choice, but because they have nothing for iftar, nothing for suhoor. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is saying, have sympathy for those people. And through this, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will increase your sustenance. He will increase your rizq. مَا نَقَصَ مَالٌ مِّن صَدَقَةٍ. Whenever you give sadaqah, your wealth never decreases. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has said. Rather, in multiple ahadith, it is mentioned that it is multiplied and returned back to you. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he continues with this point about generosity. Just to summarize the hadith, he says that whoever feeds a fasting person when it comes to breaking his fast, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will forgive this person, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give him a copy of the same reward as the one who fasted. And some of the Sahaba, they said, Ya Rasulullah, we want to do this, but we don't have the opportunity. Financially, it is tough for us. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, no problem, even if you can't do the full iftar, at least if you give a date, you give a sip of water, you give a sip of milk, inshaAllah, this will suffice for you. being forgiven and for you getting that reward. There's many more points, like I said, my dear respected brothers, but this last point of generosity in the month of Ramadan, in the month of Ramadan especially, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam has told us in hadith narrated by Aisha radiyallahu anha that وَإِنَّ أَحَبَّ الْأَعْمَارِ إِلَى اللَّهِ مَا دُوِمَ عَلَيْهِ وَإِنْ قَلَّ, that the most beloved deed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that which is consistent even if it is less. My dear respected brothers, the month of Ramadan, if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us where we can give a lot, and we can give a lot, no problem. Nurun ala nur, we give. But even if we can't do that, the least we can do, at least a little bit every day. Ahabbul a'mari ila Allah, du'ima alayhi wa in qalla. Even if it is less, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that consistency. If you can't give, as we know, the paper for the iftar is there. If anyone is able to sponsor, then of course that is, it is great that someone can do that. But if you can't do that, at least a few dollars every day in the sadaqah put. Even if it is small, do it consistently. This is something extremely beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Even the ulama mention when it comes to taraweeh, that one of the things Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking for is consistency. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves that we are here on a nightly basis. Not just, I have work tomorrow. I'm not tired today. I have some energy. I'll go today. But then tomorrow I'm tired. I'm not going to go. Today I'm not feeling it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is looking for consistency. And I'll mention this one last point. The same hadith I am mentioning, like I said, there's a few points to go. There's also another riwayah of the same hadith from Ubadah bin Samit radiyallahu an, where he mentions one point here extra. And he says that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, he said that in the month of Ramadan, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves to see His slaves compete with one another and exert themselves to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They are exercising, exhausting every possible option, giving every ounce of energy that they have, doing absolutely everything in their power to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he continues sallallahu alayhi wasallam that whoever does that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala becomes so happy with those people that He takes them by name and He boasts to them about them to the angels, that He will go. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to the angels that look how great of a job my slave Fulan ibn Fulan is doing. Subhanallah. This is the month of Ramadan, my dear respected brothers, a chance for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to take us by name and boast about us to His angels. This is the opportunity in front of us, my dear respected brothers. Our entire life is an opportunity. But the month of Ramadan, everything is magnified. The good that a person can do is much more, but the bad that a person can do is also much more. And it is imperative that from now, we are talking about these things from now, so we can prepare for the month of Ramadan before it comes. That way, all these points that we are mentioning, we can practically implement them from the first day, from the first moment, and inshallah carry them on throughout the entire month of Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد بعد أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وقال ربكم ادعوني أستجب لكم إن الذين يستكبرون عن عبادتي سيدخلون جهنم داخرين. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروه إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله. قال الله تعالى في كتابه المجيد إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما. قال النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أرحم أمتي بأمتي أبو بكر وأشدهم في أمر الله عمر وأصدقهم حياء عثمان وأقضاهم علي وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة والحسن والحسين سيدا شباب أهل الجنة وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسوله. اللهم اغفر للعباس وولده مغفرة ظاهرة وباطنة لا تغادر ذنبه. الله في أصحابي لا تتخذوهم غرضا من بعدي فمن أحبهم فبحبي أحبهم ومن أبغضهم فببغضي أبغضهم وخير أمتي قرني ثم الذين يلونهم ثم الذين يلونهم والسلطان ذل الله في الأرض من أهان سلطان الله في الأرض أهانه الله. إن الله يأمر بالعدل والإحسان وإيتاء ذي القربى وينهى عن الفحشاء والمنكر والبغي يعظكم لعلكم تذكرون فاذكروني أذكركم واشكروا لي ولا تكفرون وأقم الصلاة.
Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت الصلاة الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله.
Still واعتدلوا, straighten the lines, fill in the gaps. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. يا أيها الذين آمنوا اتقوا الله وقولوا قولا سديدا يصلح لكم أعمالكم ويغفر لكم ذنوبكم ومن يطع الله ورسوله فقد فاز فوزا عظيما. إنا عرضنا الأمانة على السماوات والأرض والجبال فأبين أن يحملنها وأشفقن منها وحملها الإنسان إنه كان ظلوما جهولا. ليعذب الله المنافقين والمنافقات والمشركين والمشركات ويتوب الله على المؤمنين والمؤمنات وكان الله غفورا رحيما. الله سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الحمد لله رب العالمين الرحمن الرحيم مالك يوم الدين إياك نعبد وإياك نستعين اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. أرأيت الذي يكذب بالدين فذلك الذي يدع اليتيم ولا يحض على طعام المسكين فويل للمصلين الذين هم عن صلاتهم ساهون الذين هم يراءون ويمنعون الماعون. الله أكبر. سمع الله لمن حمده. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. الله أكبر. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Inshallah, before leaving, all the brothers can see on the back wall under the fan, the list is there for signing up for the iftari for the month of Ramadan. Any of the brothers who can sponsor, inshallah, please add your names on the list. And inshallah, each day will be split between multiple brothers if needed. And the prices and everything are there as well as all the dates that are available that the masjid will be having iftar, inshallah. Please add your names, inshallah. Jazakallah.